This year of 2011 happens to be 70 years since I made my first profession as a Capuchin brother on May the 18th of 1941. It has been a wonderful 70 years filled with many blessings, many graces. As a Capuchin brother in the province of St. Joseph, I've had many wonderful opportunities to work in the spirit of St. Francis. But I think the greatest highlight of my 70 years in the Capuchin order has been knowing and coming under the influence of Father Solanus Casey. I began, after my first profession, to work as Father Solanus' secretary at the monastery office. And I think his influence, his inspiration, has followed me all through my 70 years as a Capuchin brother. And for that I say thanks be to God, thanks be to God. Another time when he was in the refectory in Detroit, the custom in those days was that the food was passed around and everybody sat in seniority. And so Father Solanus' place at the table was near the top of the row, and he was next to one of the older friars who was quite a big man. And of course Father Solanus was a very thin person, and he always ate kind of sparingly anyway. So one of the brothers who was passing the food, and it happened to be a day when there was conversation, so when Father Crescentian, who sat next to Father Solanus, took a big helping and piled his plate up, and then Father Solanus took just a little bit of everything, and the brother says to Father Solanus, "Well, Father Solanus, you should eat more. Why don't you take a big plateful like Father Crescentian?" And Father Solanus, well, kind of smiled, and he said, "Oh, well, you know, big furnaces require more fuel." One of my favorite recollections of Father Solanus at the monastery office occurred one time when Father Solanus had been fighting a cold, and he was quite subject to colds. And on this occasion, he had been fighting it for a couple of days, and so it was in the evening. And he usually worked at his desk in the evening, sometimes till 9, 10 o'clock at night. And so this evening, around 8 o'clock, the office was cleared out and nobody was there. And so I said to Father Solanus, "Why don't you get away early, go to bed, get some extra rest, and that'll help your cold?" Well, he kind of reluctantly decided he would do so, so he put everything away on his desk, and he got up, and he was just walking out of the office when a young couple came in the front door, and they saw Father Solanus, and they said, "Father Solanus," and he turned around and he went back sat down at his desk, and he was talking with them for quite a while. Then I thought, well, I'll leave the office and I'll come back a little later and close up things. And so I left, and well, when I came back, it was almost 10 o'clock, and Father Solanus was still there. But from the smiles on their faces, I saw that he had helped this young couple. And so after they left, I said to Father Solanus, "Oh, it's too bad you didn't get away a little sooner, because you could have got some extra rest and take care of your cold." And he kind of smiled, and then he said to me, he said, Well, you know, when Jesus was on the way to Calvary, and just before he had the third fall, he stopped and consoled the weeping women. And I thought to myself, what a wonderful attitude. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to help people all the time, and no matter how much it cost him, he was always willing to help other people. But there's another time I remember one of his, the priest who was a classmate of Father Solanus, Father Damasus Wickland, was a little older than Father Solanus, and he was retired at Huntington with Father Solanus, and Father Damasus was mainly in the infirmary, would have his meals there and so on. And Father Solanus would often come in and visit with him a little while, talk with him. And one day, Father Solanus was in there, and he said, got the idea. He said, "Oh, I'll get my violin and I'll play something for you." So when he went out, Father Damasus says to Brother Mark, who was taking care of him at that time, he says, quick, Mark, put on some records. So that he wouldn't have to listen to Father Solanus playing his violin. There's an interesting episode of Father Solanus' encounter with the bees. Down at Huntington, Indiana, where we had a big apple orchard, we had bees, which are very important for the pollination in the orchard. And one day the bees were very agitated, and there was great danger of them swarming, and we'd lose the hive. So Father Solanus went down right up to the bees without any covering to protect him, and he took out his harmonica and he gently began to play the harmonica, and very soon the bees had quieted down and gone back into the hive, and he saved them from swarming and losing them. This statue of our Blessed Mother, the Immaculate Conception, was dates in this little chapel, little oratory, from about 1940. This little chapel was where the brother novices used to say their little office every day, and before the statue of our Blessed Mother, and there was another little altar in this chapel for Mass, but the statue was often taken out during the month of May for the May crowning and other celebrations in honor of our Blessed Mother. It was a favorite place to pray for Father Solanus also, and but this little chapel has been a part of the monastery from the very beginning.
This chapel is also the place where Father Solanus celebrated his last Mass. It was on June the 28th, which was the Feast of the Sacred Heart that particular year. And it was the last Mass celebrated, and then some 3 days later he went into the hospital to where he remained until the time of his death.
His last Mass was on the Feast of the Sacred Heart that year, so when he was in the hospital then, this skin ailment that he had begun to cover his whole body. And since he was allergic to the antibiotics at that time, penicillin and sulfa drugs, there was nothing they could do for him. And it covered his whole body, and he was very red and itchy and very painful. And but he was very patient. And one time, Brother Ignatius asked him, "Oh, Father, it must be very painful." And he said, "Oh, would that it was 10,000 times more, so I would have something to offer up to the dear Lord." And so that's the way it was for many days in the hospital. But finally, on the last day, the night before, Father Gerald, the provincial, had visited him, and Father Solanus just made the remark, "Oh, tomorrow will be a wonderful day." We didn't know what he meant. I don't know if he knew what he meant. But anyway, the next day, in the morning, his brother, Monsignor Edward, was here, and Edward thought he looked a little better that morning. And so he went to his room, and he thought he'd send a couple of postcards to some of the family to let them know that Father Solanus seemed to be feeling better. But during that time, the nurse and orderly came in his room, and one of the sisters might have been there too, I'm not sure. And so they changed the bed, and they gave him a rub down with some oil, and he was very weak, and he tried to say something to them, and his voice was so weak they didn't understand what he said. And they laid him down on the pillow, but all of a sudden he sat up by himself, and in a very clear voice he said, "I give my soul to Jesus Christ." And with that he fell back, and that he died. And it happened to be at 11 o'clock on July the 31st, the very day and hour that he had said his first Mass in 1904.